Hey, everybody, welcome to Landman Episode 1, the deep dive nobody asked for. My man Gates, my man Boar, my man Matt, we're going to talk about it. But before we start, I wanted to read from the press release that Paramount put out. Based on the notable 11-part podcast Boomtown, Landman is set in the proverbial boomtowns of West Texas and is a modern-day tale of fortune-seeking in the world of oil rigs. The series is an upstairs-downstairs story, I don't know what that means, of roughnecks and wildcat billionaires that are fueling a boom so big it's reshaping our climate, our economy, and our geopolitics. All right, somebody take the first scene. I thought the first scene was epic. Somebody lay it out. What happened in the first scene?
Yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting. The drama was not light. The reality of the situation only came to light when he started reciting the chain of title ownership on the property and telling the cartel brethren why they were wrong and why they only own surface. But I think the whole hostage situation was a bit much. But hey, I think you're going to have some sensationalist points of that in that show. So it was fine.
Yeah, who would have ever thought you were going to get a Permian Basin Trust, Meridian Oil, ConocoPhillips, MTEX oil reference from Hollywood?
Yeah.
Gates, you ever been held hostage, Gates?
I've had a landowner try to run me over with his side-by-side after
Nice.
I had to fill him in on the fact that he only owned surface and we were going to be putting some pads out on his property. He looked at me and said, "You're on my property, so I can kill you." And I said, "That's called murder." And I walked off to my truck and heard him fire up the side-by-side. And I had the surveyors standing about 20 feet away and they yelled, "Watch out." And I looked over and stepped out of the way just as the guy was trying to run me over. He climbed into the pickup truck with me and wouldn't let me close my door and started screaming at me about how he was going to kill anybody that came out on his property and all that. But I mean, those instances are pretty rare out in the field.
Yeah, I think the wildest thing we ever had happen when I was at Kane is one day a CEO called me up and said, "Hey, I just have to let you know we've been sued." And I was like, "Okay, what happened?" And he goes, "Well, this landowner sued us claiming that I impregnated his prize pig." And CEO didn't talk to me for 6 months because I said, "Well, is it true?" All right, Boar, is there
Was
a
it true?
land? Yeah, he hung up the phone, so technically to this day I don't know. But Boar, is there any landman alive that actually could have been kidnapped by the cartel, masked up with a bag over his head, dragged into a room? It was. Who knew if they actually beat him up a little bit or not, and then call him out by saying that Halliburton's going to argue or lead a raid against him if anything happens to him? Is there any landman that can do that in our business?
Well, I mean, whomst among us has never had a burlap sack over their head and, held up by the cartel or some octogenarian mineral owner? I'm sure we've all had that every day, right, Gates? No, I mean,
I normally have a ball in my mouth when the bag's over my head. So.
Oh man, no, I mean, we've all had our threats and everything. I remember in Louisiana, a guy told me he was going to come over to Dallas and slit me from. I think it was when he said that in the scene. He said, "What if I just slit you from your huevos to your throat or something?" I had a guy say the Kunas version of that in Louisiana. He's like, "I'll just come over there to Dallas and come up in your fancy building and cut your nuts cut you from your nuts to your throat," and shit like that. We all had mineral owner threats, surface owner threats, but no, I've never dealt with the cartels. Of course.
I think the closest was when I was working in West Virginia, living and working in West Virginia, and this
Oh
was
yeah.
the start of the Marcellus. I was working for Magnum Hunter, Gary Evans group, and I was trying to lease a group out of Weston, West Virginia, and I didn't know where Weston was, so got on the road as normal and show up, and I could tell by the last name that I was dealing with some Italian folks, and basically when I walked into the place, they were very welcoming, but they said, we're going in the back. And I said, okay, well, this might be the end. At that point, I was running like 103, 104 degree fever, so I wasn't feeling very well. But we got back there. They ended up signing the lease. And then from there, they basically just paraded me around the town. Apparently, this little town of Weston, where I think EQT may still have an office, they owned not only the furniture building they were in, and there was Italian cable playing, but they owned about half of the buildings down the street, and they wanted to show me every single building that they owned, and they were so proud of it. So I'm not necessarily accusing mob ties there, but it was definitely interesting. And there were some other ones in West Virginia that were definitely eye-opening.
Oh yeah.
I think you guys have probably had the situations where you've heard the gun cock as you're walking around or up to the door of someone. I had that before.
Yeah.
So while the warden will tell you that I don't actually play any of these roles in life currently, it's not fair to say that I haven't played these roles in earlier in my life.
Yeah.
So talking about the roles, I think it's kind of interesting because there are so many different things that landmen do, and there are so many different types of landmen out there. You got in-house guys, you got field guys, you got due diligence guys, surface guys. They took kind of all of what landmen do and put it all into one character. And I mean, you've got, Billy Bob is portraying, I mean, he's a surface landman, he's the ops manager, he's obviously, like the VP in the company, head of the land department. And that used to be a role for a single person way back in the day. But it is extremely rare now to find somebody who does wear all of those different hats in the same job capacity, because things have gotten so much more complicated over the last 20 years that you have to have guys who specialize for different roles. And they kind of took, the whole idea of a landman that most people don't know. I mean, Toohey sits in an office every single day and is on the phone, going into meetings, going out and, doing business development and stuff. I don't get out into the field anymore. I sit in the office and I'm, processing paperwork and sending guys out to the field. But it was very interesting to me because when you put all of that into one person, there is absolutely no way that one person could get all of those jobs done and keep a company running.
Yeah.
At least the size that they're portraying.
Yeah. That is an interesting point. I think that's like, look at Boar. He runs his own shop, and he'll go out in the field and do things, but for the most part, he's running a company. He might be the closest persona to Billy Bob that we have among the four of us, and likeness of character. But I think Gates brings up a good point, is no one really understands what we do. I think it's pretty well laid out by Billy Bob in the early part, where he says, look, we basically acquire the contracts that are necessary for an oil and gas company to drill, but it doesn't really stop there. And I think through the complexity of this whole industry and how it's evolved, there's a lot more segmentation in terms of who's going to the field and who's doing what. But I do think that there has been a recent the resource component has definitely shrunk. So there's less of us doing more. And we could talk about that all day, I think, as we've kind of gone through the booms and busts. But I think it is kind of interesting. At least Billy Bob does give some understanding of what it is we do. But I don't know that putting out fires or being out on location and dealing with that would ever be the case. We've usually got plenty of ops folks that can deal with that, or contractors that are going to deal with those things. So,
in fairness to Sheridan Taylor, nobody'd watch that shit though. So we do have to remember it's Hollywood, and Tom, a CIA agent will tell you they're sitting there scrolling the internet 24 hours a day looking for something, and they're not out, doing Mission Impossible, jumping out of airplanes and stuff. All right, I was going to close on this question, but since you bring it up, let's talk it now. Boar, is this actually good for our industry or bad for our industry?
That's a good question. I get probably some of the good cancels out some of the bad of it. It probably sensationalizes some of it, and then brings some attention to maybe the importance of people who are a little bit astray in life. I mean, Billy Bob, I've got some divorces under my belt and some, substance tendencies and some, stories out in the field and some mileage on me and things like that. And there's a bunch of people like that in America that actually make things work in different industries. So that kind of, to me, brings awareness to the fact that everything that everybody does that feels easy on a daily basis is brought to you by people like that in the field who are doing this sort of ill-defined role that is actually pretty damn taxing emotionally to your family, physically, all that. So I don't, do we need sympathy? No, but maybe they appreciate the fact that when they go to the grocery store or go to pick up pills at the pharmacy, that we're a major part of the reason that's all so easy.
Hey, Gates, is this good or bad? What's your take? Going to help our industry or hurt?
I mean, I've gotten a lot of new followers on Twitter about it, so there's that. In terms of the industry, I don't really think it matters that much, because people have a perception of our industry, whether it's good or bad. And that perception, if they're not part of the industry, is painted by, mainstream media. And you see a lot of the bad shit that happens in our industry. Most of the time, nobody's paying attention when everything's running fine and everybody's doing their job. And we don't have, oil spills or fires or, wrecks where people die out in the field, stuff like that. So I don't think it really has much of an impact. I have had quite a few people texting me saying, hey, there's a TV show about Landmen. And so, they're going to watch that and they're going to think they know that this is a Hollywood portrayal of our industry. So hopefully everybody takes that with a grain of salt. But, what Matt was saying earlier about the fact that you've got Billy Bob sitting there reciting the chain of title and explaining, how they acquired the mineral rights and all of that stuff. There is some truth behind some of what he's showing. And that part's interesting. My wife doesn't understand what it is that I do either. And I've been doing this for 15 years now. I don't know. I've kind of got mixed feelings about it. And I wish that they could have maybe toned things down just a little bit with the excessive action. But hey, you got to get eyeballs on the show. So. All
right, Matt. What's
I just
your
wonder
take?
when
this is going to be good.
When are they going to get to romancing old ladies?
8 for an 8th.
Yeah, I think, I don't know if any publicity is good publicity. I think Gates captured it pretty well. I think generally it's good for the industry. We'll see where the rest of the show goes. I don't think there was anything that necessarily portrayed us too terribly. I do think that one thing that you talk about a lot, Chuck, is how important it is for us to educate the rest of the world in terms of what it is we do and what it is we provide. And what it is we provide is just cheap energy, and that's really that's the key point of it. Will we get that out of Taylor Sheridan's version? Well, we'll see. But I think outside of some of the crazy things in the first couple of episodes, I think it is generally good for the industry, or at least good for Landmen. We'll see. Time will tell with it, but yeah.
You guys
Chuck,
are all
I think you ought to
idiots.
get Alex Epstein's thoughts on that.
Yeah, there we go. Hey, Epstein, can we please talk about it? I don't know. He may not come on the podcast after I say this. You guys are all wrong. The single greatest thing that'll happen to the energy business is if we get to see Demi Moore's tits. I mean, let's just cut to the chase on that right there. I have this whole theory, and we're going to come out of Landman life for just a second, go into private equity world. We all pissed away so much money for 10 years. Chasing shale deals because we overpaid for stuff, and we wound up being way better than we thought we were going to be and producing too much oil. And the way we dealt with all those losses is we sat there and we tried to make everything more secure. Like, I only buy production now. I hedge that production. We tried to make it incredibly low risk, and we totally forgot that the greatest thing about the oil business, and you guys are all too young to remember this, but the reason you got into the oil business is you wanted to be rich. You wanted to be J.R. Ewing. You wanted 3 babes on each arm running around. It was sexy to be a wildcatter, and we've lost that in the industry, and my hope is that this is going to bring it back. It's going to make us, landmen are sexy.
Bringing sexy back.
Exactly. All right. Let's go around the horn again. Give me favorite scene or favorite line. Matt, go first.
I'm trying to go back through the first scene, or the first. I do think the first scene was pretty good with the recitation of the chain of title. That was good. I think part of the problem is I'm forgetting the rest of the episode. But I did, that one sticks with me.
Yeah, that was good.
All right. Gates, give us your favorite line.
My favorite scene was the.
Can't hear you.
I don't know what he's saying.
Yeah, I didn't hear what
Chuck,
you said.
You need to get Starlink, dude.
Yeah. This may be a Riverstone problem in fairness to me. So I was like, okay, what's your favorite scene, Gates? And you just froze. So maybe bad. Maybe my Wi-Fi was bad. Sorry about that.
Okay. I really like the aftermath of that, crazy plane crash, when the truck. Okay. So first off, with that scene, those truck drivers out in the oil field, they will run into anything and everything. 100%. So the fact that the guy did not slow down because there was a plane sitting there on the road, that's not surprising at all. Normally they're running over like, a prize bull or something like that. But there's a lot of wrecks in the oil field. Those guys work really long hours driving their trucks. A lot of them are on meth. They don't slow down for shit. So some of that was kind of realistic, but I really liked the way that Billy Bob came out and was handling the deal, talking with the sheriff about, hey, can I put a road going around the crime scene and everything? And I worked as a surface landman down in South Texas for quite a few years. So I've seen that extra level of problem solving where, hey, we've got to get from point A to point B. And for whatever reason, our, primary route is no longer an option. How are we going to fix this? And I've been out there at 3 a.m., right off the county road where we're moving a rig, and the cattle guard across the county road busted when the rig drove over it, and none of the rest of the vehicles can get through. And you get the welder on the phone. Hey, I need you out here right now. Call up the, county commissioner, leave him a voicemail. Hey, I'm fixing your cattle guard. We're fixing up part of the road and regrading everything for the approach, which is why the cattle guard got busted. I really liked that scene because, there is a huge element of, hey, how can I take this situation and resolve the problem? We will figure out who to apologize to or who we need to pay and compensate after the fact. But we got to keep this thing moving. We can't stop for 12 hours. It's going to cost us $100,000 an hour that rig is just sitting there on that county road, not moving.
The subtle part of that I really liked that I felt was very industry was, I need a goddamn mile of caliche out here.
Yeah, right.
I thought that was great. The other thing about that scene, and this is in my top 5 of the whole lines of the show, is, the sheriff was bitching because he didn't report the plane stolen to him. And he said, if I reported everything that got stolen, the whole Permian Basin would be a crime scene.
Yeah. I think that's just, taking off from there. Like we had significant issues with theft across most of, our assets in the last iteration. And it's pretty rampant, especially where you're even isolated. There's no homes or dwellings or anything. It's pretty serious out there.
The only time I interacted with the cartel is we were investors in TXCO down in the Maverick Basin. And my engineering partner, Mike, was just going, man, these wells are half as good as the engineer from TXCO is saying. And we spent like 3 months going back and forth. And what we figured out is we were actually getting they were using production numbers off the wellhead, and we were using sales numbers to do our forecasting. And it turns out somebody was stealing our oil. And so we had to go out there, put locks on the tanks and do all that. There was a guy just driving around, tipping our field guys a couple $100 and stealing our oil. And it was cartel stuff. All right, Boar, you got a take on a favorite line, favorite scene? I know you only watched about half of it.
Of the half I watched, I really liked the diner scene when he goes in and she's like, there's 2 parts to that scene, if you don't mind, but
break it down.
Waitress asked, are you eating breakfast or dinner? And and he said something like, I don't know, no such thing as lunch anymore or something. But, I can relate to that. Remember Chili's 2 at the Love Field Airport before they renovated?
Yeah.
There was a waitress in there who always knew what I wanted. And, if it was 6 a.m., I was definitely having a drink to get on the plane. If it was 6 p.m. going out, I was, drinking before dinner, meeting somebody. But I like that part of that. And I also like the part where he's talking to that disgruntled rancher in that they came and met him and they were drinking the pitcher of Ultra. And he says to the ranchers gets offended by something that he says or pretends to be something that Billy Bob says. And Billy Bob's like, I pay you $200,000 fucking dollars a month. He said, you're an oil man who spends the money we give you on cattle. So don't delude yourself into thinking you're a rancher. And I just love that because there's, we all deal with these people who, they tell us how much they prize their surface, so we'll pay them big damages and things like that. And really, it's a mouse fart in a hurricane compared to the royalty that we're about to lay on them.
Mm-hmm.
The part of that scene that I really liked, though, is when he said, I can't pay you damages. I can give you a solar lease for 1 month or whatever.
That's right. He was being resourceful. I love that.
Yeah. And I liked that because there were so many times when I was working surface down south that they would say, hey, we can't spend money on X. So I have to figure out what can I spend money on Y and what AFEs are open that I can bill something to get this guy off my back. And usually it was a small amount. But at the same time, there are always restrictions on things, and you can't set a precedent by giving somebody $10,000 for a bull. You know, the second you do that, every single person in the area is going to be asking for $10,000 for some bull that you killed 5 years ago, you know?
Yeah. I'd like to add to that, you know, you talk about precedents being set. There's like, you know, there's like the Oklahoma force pooling system where you can't pay a lot, or otherwise they do fair market checks and you got to pay everybody that amount. Or there's like a favored nations clause in a lease. And you hear of landmen, not saying I've done this, but you know, you go and somebody says, well, I want, you know, $5,000 an acre. And I'm like, well, if I pay you $5,000 an acre, I got to pay, you know, such and such 5,000 because he's got a favored nations. And you find out he's got, you know, goat pasture minerals in bumfuck county, Kansas. And you're like, I tell you what, I'll lease those fucking minerals from you for, you know, $1,000 an acre, and I'll pay you 4,000 on this one. And there's you know, a million ways to get around that precedent sometimes, or I'll buy that piece of shit Cadillac you got for twice the price of it.
I think the other piece of it too that you guys are bringing up is the fact that we also kind of, you know, play middleman a lot, but really are able to give the realistic perspective of the landowner and say, hey, look, guys, like, you know, as you're talking to someone in house, like you could put yourself in their shoes in this situation, and they may not, and that's kind of the negotiation you have between, you know, your company and maybe the landowner. But I do think it's a unique perspective. I think all of us, you know, if anything, are trying to preserve the land and put it in the best places we can. And I think we're the best folks for that, because there's been so many times where all of us have been run over by engineers or ops folks or service folks. And it's just like, hey, guys, this is someone's property, and it means something to them. So let's try to do the best we can to preserve that.
It's always easier when they're reasonable, right? I mean, if they come out of the gate just shitty, trying to posture with this negotiation stance, and you know, but if they're, look, I've owned this a long time, I understand that you've got to get the mineral owners need to enjoy their minerals, but please work with me. Of course, we're going to work with them, and everybody inside our company, up and down the chain, will try to work with them. Because it works. Like, I'll call the ops guy, I'll call everybody, and I'll say, look, this guy's nice as hell. Here's his phone number. He's requested this, and that just goes a long way up and down the chain.
Yeah, I think the other thing too is whenever you get an advisor or an intermediary involved between the landman and, say, the landowner, is usually where some of the rift comes in. It's like playing a game of telephone. Like, we're just trying to have as seamless of communication as we can from, you know, whether it be investors in New York, or I guess John Hamm, or, you know, dealing with the landowner down at the field level. I think the ability to have that communication with them and directly with them. Usually, most of the time, I'd say 95% of the time, the landowners themselves are reasonable. But I'm saying that from someone that's not spent a lot of recent time in South Texas, someone that's dealing with, you know, assets out in the Permian. So I'd love to get Gates' perspective where it is not 90%. And that South Texas or South Louisiana or other places may be actual landman hellholes in terms of trying to deal with landowners.
Our biggest problem in South Texas is that there are so many people who bought ranches and put up high fences and are protein feeding, and they have it for just a fun hunting ranch. And when you come in on those situations, people are talking about, you know, well, you're going to have to pay me, you know, $30,000 for every deer that gets run over on the road and stuff like that. And a lot of the South Texas landowner attorneys that we deal with, they come at you with a 65-page lease form. And if you read that lease form, I mean, there's at least 20 different ways by the time the ink is dry on it that you've already violated that lease and you owe them more money. And a lot of these landowners have gotten into the mindset of, you know, this is my land and I'm going to tell you what you can and can't do. And there are a lot of rights that we have, especially in Texas, with a mineral lease that people are always going to be trying to restrict and get as much cash as possible out of the whole deal. But I mean, I've got, I've got maps all over the place in the office where I have tracks with a red X on it. And I just know, hey, we're not ever going to be able to get surface locations over here. So if we've got to move the surface location, 4,000 feet to the north or whatever to put it on somebody who's a little more reasonable, we just know, hey, that's what we're going to have to do.
Yeah.
And the ops guys and the engineers and the rock lickers and all of those guys are going to have to make that work, because at the end of the day, if I run into a situation where somebody is completely against having a surface location, we can get it done. We certainly can, but how much money and time are you willing to waste on that?
We had a portfolio company that leased from Boone Pickens in Roberts County, and that was supposedly his favorite quail hunting ranch and all. And he was the biggest pain in the rear. Like, we were literally, he was getting our maps, telling us where to put locations, doing all this. And then we hit a 2,000 barrel a day well, and we started sending him checks. And he bought us a bulldozer and said, put the next location anywhere you want. So he totally changed his tune. All right. So we got a few minutes left on this.
Money talks.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, we got a few minutes left on this. The thing I found the most unrealistic in this show, as the father of 3 daughters, there is no way Billy Bob Thornton's 17-year-old daughter is sitting there talking to him like that. And I mean, I guess maybe that's the ultimate.
As a father, that made me want to fucking throw up. I was like, I kind of laughed. I laughed because I've always, heard things that were, girl things, and not sexual, but like girl things in the other room. And I'm like, oh God, and it made me uncomfortable. And my wife's like, quit being a pussy. This is what's going to happen with, the time of the month or what, like I was getting, things like that. And then, when that came on, I was like, oh my God, if I ever fucking heard that, I don't think I could recover.
So what I hated about the whole father-daughter stuff was the fact that when she came back into his bedroom crying and said he's not the one, I was like, that's the point where Billy Bob needed to walk into the living room, beat the shit out of that kid, and kick him out of the house. That's the only way that situation is going to turn out realistic. And so, given the scene at the football stadium and all of that, I was like, dude, I've got a little girl, and if that ever happened, get the fuck out of my house.
I mean, the discussion, you two having sex? Of course, Daddy. I mean, God help me if that happens with any of my daughters. And my oldest is 22, and we just now had a beer together.
Yeah, that was
then,
a bit much.
Then the follow-up to it, so long as he don't come in me, he can come anywhere on me, was just like,
God.
Yeah. Oh my God. Please don't let that happen to me. Even when I'm like 92 and my kids are in their 60s. Good grief. That was
brutal.
I saw somebody's take on Twitter. I think it was Alan Gilmer, and he had a clip of that scene in the football stadium, and he said, this is what happens when you try to stretch this over 9 episodes. You get scenes like this. And it was like, it served absolutely no purpose. There was no reason to have that in there.
I'd like to point out that Matt has changed hats.
Yes, thank you.
Perfect.
Engineer.
He's a man wearing multiple hats.
We're always right.
Yeah.
That's awesome. The one thing I did have happen to me, and this was about 7 years ago. So let's go. Eldest is 15 and the baby is 10. and we were walking down the street, and there was this wrapper of something, sexual in nature, and it said raw dog. And we were walking past it, and Charlie turns to Kelly and goes, raw dog is where a man comes inside you without a condom. And I was like, oh my God.
Oh.
One, how do you know this? And two, why are you telling your 10-year-old sister this? And Kelly, who's the most innocent, naive thing on the planet, just has her face like this. Ah! So.
Oh my God. It's just nauseating.
God, it was. Okay, let's close it out with everybody do the bit on John Hamm's character. So we briefly see Monty in the show. Give me a take on it. You think it's real? Where do you think the character's going? Lay something on me.
Yeah, I think
it's BRV.
Speaking of, there you go.
Yeah. This BRV's hat.
Yeah, no, shout out actually Taylor Hart at JP Morgan. I told him I owe him this hat. So he's getting this at some point. No, but to your question, I think I don't know. He's some sort of investor LP money guy. I think he is your Chuck Yates, maybe in all this. So I think that's simply where he could land.
Oh, interesting. I don't think I'm as cool as that.
Or board member.
There you go. Chairman of the board.
So
yeah,
my take on Monty is the part where he's calling Billy Bob and talking about, how bad is it? Who's the best liability attorney and all of that stuff. I was like, nobody at that level is getting that far into the weeds. And, when you're sitting there and you're, having lunch at the club with all of your other big wigs and all that, you're not getting calls from a landman out in the field. And there are other levels that handle that kind of stuff. And so, that whole scene about, I'm the fucking boss and you do what I fucking say or whatever. I think that is certainly a mentality that a lot of people have when they're at that level. But I don't think that they're interacting with people who are actually out in the field taking care of the problems. They're insulated. So I feel like, for the show's sake, they had to have him be involved. But your VP of land is not giving you a phone call and making recommendations about what attorneys you need to hire and stuff like that.
I would disagree. I think that there's a pretty broad stroke depending on the size of company you work at, where you're watering the plants, but you're also giving input on things like that. So I thought that was an interesting piece. I'm really curious where he got it from, because which attorney or which firm would you go with in terms of dealing with this this particular liability issue? And it's like, well, I can rattle some off too. Like, so I do think it was pretty insightful there. So I think that, like, it just shows kind of the versatility of a landman and where they can play and the things they know. What is it like? We know a little bit about a lot of things. I mean, it's kind of that.
I would mostly agree with. I don't know. I'm between the two of you on that, because maybe he was a little highbrow for that, but maybe not, because there are fix-it guys in every company, and sometimes at the field level fix-it guy talks to the office level fix-it guy, and he looks like John Hamm, and so I don't know. Maybe it was slightly sensationalized, but the whole show needs to be, or nobody's going to relate or watch it or, be enthused by it. But I think those guys do exist, and I sort of played one when I worked for an E&P almost. We did have some blowouts and things like that. No cartel explosions, but, things that people would call me from the field and say we got a problem, and when I was working inside the E&P in Dallas.
When I saw John Hamm, you're right. He kind of felt like the private equity chairman of the board, slick finance dude playing CEO. So they almost kind of merged those companies. Because if you went archetypal CEO in our industry today of these bigger companies, they're generally an engineer of some sort, a reservoir engineer by training or whatever. So I don't see a lot of our CEOs running around in Armani suits with slicked back hair and Hermes ties on. But anyway, it does make a fascinating character, and it's going to be fun to watch. So,
Yeah.
Well, guys, y'all were cool to do this. I had fun, despite all our technical difficulties.
Yeah,
I appreciate you having us on.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I enjoyed it. I think it's good to get like all of us to talk about these things, in particular things that we talk about fairly extensively among ourselves that maybe others don't. I think it's just helpful to give some insight, and continue to educate those that may not be aware of what it is we do or what the industry does.
How you're kind of needed as the glue piece.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't mean to overemphasize our importance,
Sure,
I guess.
Sure.
But there are people like us in many industries that are kind of these, I don't know, fix it. You heard me say that earlier, fix it guys, glue pieces, or just deal guys in general that put all the technical people together. Because as you know, you get enough fucking technical people in a room, they can't change a goddamn light bulb.
That is especially not if they're Aggies.
That's right.
Cool.
Yeah,
dude.
but to be fair, enough.